HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents How We Grow Through What We Go Through, Self-Compassion Practices for Post-Traumatic Growth, by Christopher Willard, Doctor of Psychology. Read by Kent Klineman. Preface. This book emerged in the midst of the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, while forests and cities burned, as climate change accelerated, and as a critical and historic presidential election loomed on the horizon. Such times of personal and global upheaval unsettle and even rewire our individual and collective nervous systems, often in ways that are deeply traumatic. And yet, it's not like the rest of life stopped happening in 2020. Close friends lost jobs. My son's best friend moved across the country. My mom got diagnosed with a rare, degenerative dementia called Lewy body dementia, a heartbreaking spiral into physical paralysis and memory loss. She died weeks after vaccines became available. Life and death, and their 10,000 joys and sorrows, continued apace. Only there was a pandemic to contend with, too. Friday, the 13th of March, 2020, was the day that everything shut down where my family lives. Passengers on my flight home from Chicago had been wearing masks and gloves. And suddenly, our kids' school was canceled for the next 2 weeks. Remember when pandemic closures were going to be for only 2 weeks? The entire globe seemed to skid into a sudden stop. My wife and I sat on the back porch looking into our postage stamp-sized yard as the kids trampled through the lingering snow. We actually had a moment to chat as we sipped our coffee and the kids entertained themselves for once. "The kids are never going to forget this time," I uttered, trying to sound profound. My wife, a medical historian whose job is literally to study the ways that plagues and pandemics alter the course of history, glanced over at me, one eye still on the kids. "No one is going to forget this time," she said. "Historians will talk about the coronavirus pandemic of 2020, and then the Delta variant of 2021, and the Omicron variant of 2022 in 1,000 years. I sat and pondered this as the kids began creating an imaginary ice cream shop with the muddy snow. How do I want them to remember this time? I wondered. How do I want them to remember me in this time? How do I want to feel when I remember this time? The questions nagged at me for the rest of the afternoon. Later, when I found myself panic buying 8 pounds of dried garbanzo beans, I reflected, do I want to be the guy who bought the last roll of toilet paper, or the guy who dropped off a few extra rolls at our elderly neighbor's house? And I guess I can be the guy who drops off hummus for the neighbors, too, since I bought way too many beans. Then, as my own mother went in and out of the hospital at the height of the first COVID-19 surge, I asked myself, what kind of son do I want to be when my mother is sick? Although friends on social media were running marathons on their home treadmills or learning 5 new languages during lockdown, the conversations I had with friends and clients became less about what we were going to do in this time and more about who we wanted to be throughout the pandemic and after. Who do I want to be nagged me throughout that time when billions of people around the world stopped what they were doing to shelter in place and recognized for the first time that essential workers toiled on in fear of infection. Some people's lives changed little. Most changed a lot. Some experienced the trauma of death and dying up close with family and friends. Others said goodbye to loved ones over iPads. Millions lost jobs, homes, careers, and educations. Domestic violence surged as people abused substances and each other. In the midst of all of it, new waves of civil rights protests broke out, first in Minneapolis and then around the nation and the world, as attention turned to another pandemic, one of racism, injustice, and violence against African Americans that has persisted for generations. I kept reflecting, what kind of ally have I been? What kind of ally do I want to be going forward? My choices followed and flowed from these questions, and they led me here. This book is my answer to those questions, or maybe it's more accurate to say my response to these questions. As individuals, as communities, as humans, we can allow traumas to push us toward more sickness, sadness, fear, and division, or we can use them to water the seeds of our growth and development. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, gets a lot of press, but the reality is that PTG, or post-traumatic growth, is the far more likely outcome of life's challenges. In my research, I've discovered the foundations of PTG, not just in neuroscience and psychology, but in anthropology and in human history. We can change and grow. We can access the tools built into our bodies to become more resilient and empowered. We can train our minds and hearts, growing new connections in our brains through the wonder of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity describes the way the brain physically rewires and changes in response to how we use it and to the experiences we have. To paraphrase Canadian neuropsychologist Donald Hebb, neurons that fire together, wire together. Study after study shows that we can change our brains through meditation and other practices, much the way we build muscle through regular exercise. We can change our relationships with ourselves and with others, trading unhelpful alliances for ones that help us to heal and grow. We can do this with tools that have boosted human resilience in the face of adversity for millennia. This book will explore 3 kinds of events that dysregulate our body, mind, and relationships. Bodily trauma can include accidents, illness, or injury due to violence, abuse, neglect, and threats of that kind. Mental and emotional trauma encompasses events we can't begin to fathom that disrupt our perception of safety in the world. Traumatic relational events can include bullying, betrayals, neglect, emotional abuse, racism, and other forms of identity-based bigotry, both macro or micro, explicit and implicit. Of course, these 3 types of traumatic events intersect with each other in complex ways. You may have already experienced all 3, with compounding effects. When we're ill, people may abandon us. A physical or sexual assault is also a relational betrayal. Marginalized groups are at far higher risk for many traumas, including re-victimization, when the larger society ignores, belittles, denies, or blames victims for their trauma. That is, when it does not condone or encourage it. All forms of trauma are intersectional in this way. Our medical model tells us we need to fix trauma, and our culture tells us we need to grow from it, when in fact what we need is to be with ourselves in our pain. And this itself is very different from wallowing in pain or pity. This distinction is a key aspect of self-compassion, a central concept in this book. Self-compassion helps us to be okay with the fact that growth and healing happen on different timelines. How we grow through what we go through is a buffet of the simplest, best techniques I can offer to encourage post-traumatic growth in our bodies, minds, and hearts. No one of these practices is a cure-all for stress and strife, but most of these should help a little and build up your resilience, like immunity over time. Try what you like as you listen, and come back to what resonates for you, knowing that your tastes and triggers may evolve and change again tomorrow, along with your nervous system. As you explore these practices, adapt them and make them yours. In fact, the more you make them yours and share them, the more they will evolve to help others too. The more we practice using our inner tools, the more we can all help each other become the kind of people we want to be and want to see. Chapter 1. Wired for Resilience. Trauma changes everything, from our bodies and brains to our relationships with others and the world. When we experience a severe mental, emotional, or physical injury, we trade perspective, growth, and learning for safety, at least temporarily. Just about everyone and everything living will experience some kind of trauma at some point, and everyone will react differently and heal differently. More men will experience trauma, but more women will experience complications of trauma and develop PTSD, at least in the reporting. Marginalized groups, people pushed to the edges of an unequal society, are even more likely to experience trauma and the compounding effects of trauma, with less access to healing resources. For some, the body's response may lock in and linger. For others, it will fade. But all of us are capable of growth and change, no matter what we have experienced. Amazingly, research indicates that although 75% of us will experience trauma, only 8 to 12% will experience PTSD, whereas 60% will experience post-traumatic growth, PTG. These are good odds. Even better news, this isn't an either-or situation. PTSD and PTG can happen simultaneously. Neuroscience indicates that growth and pain happen together, just as nearly every spiritual and philosophical tradition teaches. Let me be clear that trauma and recovery from it are awful, wrenching, slow, unpredictable, and never linear. Nothing can fully soothe our pain all of the time. Tips from friends, therapists, or memes will never fix us or make us as we were before. We can't understand each other's pain fully, but we can recognize and witness it in each other, not to fix it or ask it to be fixed, not to try to fix ourselves, but to be with and witness our pain. It is easier to show up and be present for ourselves and others when we have some tools to manage and regulate our trauma responses. You may be asking yourself if your pain is bad enough to count as trauma. The cliché goes that trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And it's true. It affects each of us differently because normal and abnormal themselves are subjective. Our built-in stress and trauma responses are there to protect us during and after a painful experience, and they protect us from future traumas. We end up rewired with sensory triggers for people, places, and things that our nervous systems still believe are dangerous. Over time, when this response becomes automatic and outlives its usefulness, it's labeled as a disorder, when in fact our nervous systems are just trying to create order out of chaos. In fact, it might be simpler to consider this book as a means of attending to, befriending, resetting, and re-regulating your dysregulated nervous system, rather than engaging in a debate about what counts as a trauma. The defenses we fire up under threat are normal and evolutionary. They helped our ancestors and us to survive. The worse or longer the threat, however, the more they rewire our brains. These responses kick into gear when we perceive threat, not necessarily when a threat is there. Let me say that again. They kick into gear when we perceive threat, not necessarily when a threat is there. With that, let's explore the typical ways we respond to stress and trauma. These are remnants from our ancestors, who lived in a far more dangerous world, though it might not seem that way. What was a trauma to our ancestors in times when we were closer to the animals we evolved from? Imagine a lion chasing you. What can you do to survive? I once asked this of an audience in Texas, and there was an actual lion tamer in the audience. Honestly, if she could self-regulate to the point that she could get into a cage with a lion, I don't know why she showed up for my mindfulness class. If you are a lion tamer, maybe you can skip ahead. The 4 F's. There are 4 ways that we can respond to the attacking lion. Each one of these responses activates our nervous systems for survival in one of 2 ways: hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Hyperarousal. 1. Fight. Fight off the attacker. This is great if there's a wild animal chasing you, but not great if the threat is a traffic jam, a colleague who's getting under your skin, or something that reminds you of your own personal lion. When we fall back on this response, we react with physical or relational aggression or irritability. Sometimes when we blame ourselves, this flips into aggression toward ourselves in the form of self-harm or risky behavior. 2. Flee. Avoid or evade the attack. This is great if it's a slow lion or you're a fast runner. Not so great if we avoid every situation that's uncomfortable or triggers us. Over time, avoidance can hardwire itself into ongoing anxiety, panic, agoraphobia, and more. Avoidance may also manifest as running toward high-stimulation distractions, addictions, and compulsions. Hypoarousal. 3. Freeze. Hide or camouflage yourself and try not to be noticed. Perhaps you play dead and give up, waiting for the attack to be over. Hypoarousal may become deliberate avoidance or unconscious dissociation over time. For many from marginalized groups, standing out may feel or be especially dangerous, and this kind of response is truly adaptive for physical, emotional, and even financial safety. 4. Fuck it. Okay, I haven't seen hypoarousal referred to clinically as such. You can also call this faint or flop. Giving up protects us from lasting trauma in a different way, with learned helplessness, a feeling that we have no control or power over our fate. This can wire our brains into depression, a slow giving up on ourselves and the world, or avoidance strategies like blunting the experience with addiction. A big enough single traumatic event or an extensive long-term trauma rewires our brains to stay in these stress responses all the time. This is the darker side of neuroplasticity. Unless you're a lion tamer, the lion attack is likely a metaphor for something that happened in your life. You likely responded with one or more of these 4 F's. That may be how you are still responding to life, long after the lion has gone. It might sound strange, but our overall arousal level for everyday challenges should be about 60% to 80% stressed. Above this, we're in hyperarousal, with hypoarousal beyond that. It's the right amount of stress within that window of tolerance that helps us grow at the edges. This is the zone where the magic happens, that may or may not be outside your comfort zone, as the meme says, but we have to stay within our safety zone if we want to truly grow. The key to your recovery from trauma is recognizing when you enter your red or danger zone and learning how to get back to your safety growth zone. Polyvagal theory provides some science behind the magic. Psychologist and researcher Stephen Porges, Ph.D., and his colleague Deb Dana, LCSW, along with others, have pioneered a new understanding of emotional, social, and physiological regulation based on the functioning of the vagus nerve. This nerve, actually 2 nerves on either side of the body, is like the information superhighway between the mind and the body. It is the physiology behind a third aspect of our nervous system called the social engagement system, according to Porges. Polyvagal theory has become central to the understanding and treatment of trauma, with more discoveries yet to come. The reality is, we need a stress and fear response. The right amount of fear keeps us safe, and stress can motivate us. If you are in an abusive relationship, it might be safer to be hypoaroused for safety until you can escape. If your military unit is called up, hyperarousal may be exactly what is required. These reactions are warranted and keep you safe. In fact, when a researcher named Arthur Kling removed the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, from a group of captured monkeys and released them back into the wild, this was not the most compassionate research project. The monkeys were all dead within weeks, having failed to recognize and respond to the dangers around them. Polyvagal chart. Freeze or flop, fight or flight. Arousal level. Freeze or flop. Below 30%, hypoarousal zone, dorsal, vagal, / parasympathetic nervous system activated. Outside the window of tolerance. Fight or flight. Above 80%, hyperarousal zone, sympathetic nervous system activated, outside the window of tolerance. Body, freeze or flop. Defensive, shrinking posture, slow and shallow breathing, lower blood pressure and heart rate, reduced immunity, slow metabolism and high energy food cravings. Cortisol levels lead to physical exhaustion and immobility. Fight or flight. Threatening posture, short, shallow, uneven breathing, heightened blood pressure and heart rate, immune system shuts down, digestive system freezes, adrenaline, testosterone, and cortisol levels lead to aggression and activation toward action. Emotions, freeze or flop. Overwhelmed, giving up, ashamed, low confidence, low motivation, dissociation, hopelessness, fight or flight, anxiety, panic, fear, frustration, rage, irritation, panic, challenged. Perceptions, freeze or flop, scanning for signals to reinforce ways to hide/avoid, fight or flight, increase in range of color and sound perception, neutral social cues perceived as hostile, brain state and cognition, freeze or flop, reduced neural activity and reduced cognitive function, slowed mental processes, low motivation, fight or flight, amygdala activated, outer cortices deactivated, personalizing, catastrophizing, negativity, bias, pessimism, either/or, rigid thinking, impulses deactivated, social, freeze or flop, eye contact and body language shrink, voice quiet and meek, avoiding rather than approaching, isolation, mistrust, withdrawal, fight or flight, eye contact and body language become threatening, voice agitated and loud, relational and empathic abilities shut down, blaming, scapegoating. Hurt, not harmed, attend and befriend. Arousal level, hurt, not harmed, 60 to 80% growth zone, nervous system awake and active, within the window of tolerance. Attend and befriend, 50% comfort zone, ventral vagal state, within the window of tolerance. Body, hurt, not harmed, upright, confident posture, breathing deep and slow, 5 to 6 cycles per minute, heart rate steady, immune and digestive systems operating. Oxytocin and testosterone levels boost confidence. Attend and befriend. Relaxed posture, breath regulated and slow, heart slow, circulation flowing evenly, immune and digestive systems operating optimally. Oxytocin level blocks cortisol, creating room for attachment and feelings of safety. Emotions, hurt, not harmed. Discomfort that does not overwhelm, engagement, excitement, safety, flow states, high motivation, gratitude, compassion, self-compassion, rising to a challenge. Attend and befriend. Satisfaction, grounded, safe, warm, comfortable, secure, connected, in control, not challenged. Perceptions, hurt, not harmed. Accurate and clear, full range of sensory perception, finding and seeking meaning. Mindfulness, attend and befriend. Largely accurate, scanning for signs that reinforce safety. Brain state and cognition, hurt, not harmed. Outer cortices activated, well-regulated, peak cognitive performance, critical and nuanced thinking, planning, impulse control, setting goals, active learning, stretching limits, curiosity activated. Attend and befriend. Brain thinking clearly but not overactivated, clear thinking, regulated thoughts, unchallenged, low risk, low reward. Social, hurt, not harmed. Eyes take in a large middle range of stimuli, full range of movement, voices steady and even, empathy for and connection to others. Attend and befriend. Eye movement and senses somewhat reduced, not scanning for danger, full range of movement, voice lower and slower, social brain active. Fundamentally, the 4 F's are useful strategies, until they aren't. Like the soldier who scans the highway for the next IED long after arriving home, the cancer survivor who anticipates illness at every ache, or the betrayed spouse.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?